The oldest thing in the file isn't the photograph. It's the light trapped inside it that refuses to admit the day is over. A 6-year-old in 1951 vanishes from a park while his brother stands 10 feet away, swearing he can still hear the Spanish word for candy. 73 years later, the missing boy, now an elderly Marine veteran and retired firefighter, opens his door to the FBI and learns his name a second time. A solved case without a how is a light left on in a room that never learned to sleep. My name's Jack Morrell, 55. I've written so many cold case obituaries for Hope that the Hope started sending me thank you cards. When Luis Albino's family closed their file this summer, DNA test, microfilm, a niece who's tougher than grief, I thought that was the end. Then I stood at the fence in West Oakland, where the woman with the bandana lured him away, and the heir tried to finish a sentence the photograph started in 1951. I'm not a believer in ghosts. I'm a believer in places that refuse to lie all at once. The first thing you notice about old park photos is how much faith the sky had in us. Jefferson Playground back when swings squeaked like gossip and a slide could brand your calves looks like a promise in black and white. 2 boys are framed near the jungle gym. Roger, 11, holding himself like a guardrail. Lise, 6, mid-step, half turned toward a woman out of frame who offered dulcies in a voice that wore home like a shawl. The photo appeared in the Tribune that week. It's the one their mother kept in her purse until the purse learned to be a drawer. I had a copy under glass on my desk, a coaster I was too reverent to use. When the Oakland PD announced what the DNA said, I lifted the frame and felt the room tilt a degree, like a ship remembering a wave it hasn't met yet, found alive. On the East Coast, reunited in June, the brother Roger got his hug before summer closed its hand. The abduction, the who and the wherefores remains fog. Ongoing, the FBI says. That's government for the story doesn't want to leave the house yet. I flew out anyway. The park is still a park, revised by lawsuits and kinder slides. A fence that wasn't there in 1951 tries to keep the century from doing what centuries do. The sycamores are larger and quieter. A grandmother counted children by names, not shirts. Bless the internet's scolding. I put my palm on a fence post where a boy once waited for a brother to look back and felt the least paranormal thing a man can feel, responsibility arriving late and demanding interest. A man in a cowl hat hovered the way locals hover when a stranger pretends to be a photographer. You doing history? He asked. Trying to learn it before it happens again, I said. He nodded like someone who's buried both the right and wrong people. My aunt used to bring flowers to this fence on his birthday, he said. Broke her own rule about permanence. She said wood listens. Wood remembers, I said. So do benches, he added, and pointed to one that faced the swing set. On its back rail, scratched shallow but intentional, DULCE, in a child's unsure hand. In the afternoon, the niece agreed to coffee and a table near the window where the noise could excuse our pauses. Her name is Ale, and her eyes are the kind that forgive on schedule and rage on holidays. She told me how a Curiosity DNA kit became a match, how a microfilm machine turned her into an archivist, how an agent with good bedside manner knocked on her door on the coast and introduced an old man to the word uncle. She told me what you won't get in pressers. He thanked her like a soldier, precise and over-earnest, and he remembered the bus trip east, but not the names of the people who collected him like a parcel. Does he want to talk? I asked. He's done enough listening, she said. He's rebuilding the shape of his name from the inside. That takes all his verbs. What do you want from the story? I asked. For it to stop being a stranger to itself, she said. I don't care about headlines. I want the place to say out loud what it did or didn't see. The place obliged in the only language it has, angles and air. At 4:10 p.m., near where the sandbox used to be, the light thinned. Not dimmed, thinned, like somebody had pulled a sheet over the day but forgot the corners. A kid ran through the patch and became a silhouette you could drink through. His mother shivered and didn't know why. The effect lasted 3 beats and snapped. No one screamed. Nobody said portal. The park inhaled and pretended to have allergies. I asked the groundskeeper if the department had installed new fixtures. He laughed me back to college. Sun does what it wants, he said. We just know the opinions out of it. Back at my motel, the kind that believes a floral bedspread apologizes for its sins, I threaded the old reporter's reel to reel, because sometimes history answers only to machines that were. I spoke to the tape like a friend you owe an uninteresting truth. He's alive, I said. He was kidnapped. He served. He saved people from fires. He hugged his brother before August. We solved a case. We didn't solve a place. At 2 a.m., my phone lit with an email from a name I didn't know. El Ruiz, subject line, corridors. The message body was 2 lines. You saw the thinning. It's not new. Come to the amphitheater at noon. Bring the photo. Noon found me at a concrete half moon no amphitheater has ever really deserved. El Ruiz was a woman in her 70s, with a posture that said every few years the city asks her to run it, and she declines. In her hand, a small mirror from a compact. In her eyes, 1951. Luce's mother stayed with us a while after. She said, by way of hi. She believed in church and purses. I believed in light. We got along. I saw a thing that week that men told me was weather. It wasn't weather. It was manners. Manners? The day trying to be more helpful than was healthy, she said. You want to see it behave? Hold the photo in the patch around noon. Make the edges argue. The air will show you where it made a corridor to carry brightness. Predators recruit from any caste. Mr. Morel. Sometimes they recruit the sky. We stood like criminals, except for the lack of crime, and she held the mirror at a cheap angle. I held the photo at chest level. The sun obliged in the way only a Californian sun can, confident, unionized, punctual. The light flared across the picture's edge as if someone in 1951 had left a door ajar between frames. It was a trick of coarse optics in old paper, but the trick told on itself. Where the blur happened, the breeze changed temperature. For 3 seconds, the air felt like a hallway nobody asked for. You can build it with mirrors, she said, but you don't have to. All you need is adults tidying with their bodies at the same time. How do you fix it? I asked. You stop tidying, she said. You stand where the corridor wants to form, and you become a wall. You teach the place to be a little rude at the hour that likes to flatter itself. We practiced like 2 children who'd been given a boring superpower. She held her mirror. I put my shoulder in the way of the thin. The flare skittered, failed to find purchase, and quit. A toddler giggled for no good reason, which is the best reason there is. That night I wrote to Ale, tell your block to be impolite at 4. She wrote back a single word. Finally, you want me to say the case is supernatural. It isn't. It's a solved kidnapping that learned to rest because a niece wouldn't. The unexplainable lives at the edges. How a park can develop a habit of politeness that makes harm easier. How a photograph decades later still argues with the light. How a room will sometimes cool when a lie is about to trip over its own shoelaces. I don't have a ghost story. I have an etiquette lesson taught by a neighborhood that got tired of being helpful to the wrong people. Tomorrow, I meet a man who was a boy on the day someone who watched a woman in a bandana ask for a favor in the kind of Spanish you trust before you inspect. He's 80 now and collects radios. He says the air back then sounded like music that couldn't decide which station it wanted. He says he can show me where the song still tries to come through if you promise not to believe you're special. The photograph sits on the motel table, finishing its sentence in the late light. It doesn't glow. It doesn't accuse. It does what testimonies do when you finally stop arguing with them. It rests, and it makes room for a new one to step forward and say, "Not this way." Mr. Delgado's apartment was a museum of radios and a masterclass in letting dust keep its dignity. He moved like a man who negotiated with his knees and won respectable terms. "Don't step on the zenith," he said. "It's older than my patience." He handed me a soda in a glass bottle because modern depression couldn't make it past the cap. "You were there," I said. "I was 11, he said. "Old enough to know bandanas mean work and sweets mean errands." She asked me to help her carry a box to the car. I said no because my mother had raised me to be inconvenient. Luis said yes because he liked to be believed. "What do you remember besides the asking?" "The air," he said. "It had a fold in it. You stood on one side and a voice on the other sounded closer than it was. It's why we all swear we could hear him." He shuffled to a Philco that looked like it had opinions about jazz, twisted a dial, and turned static into a voice like a careful uncle. "Radios do that," he said. "They make near and far argue. The park could do it too at 4 o'clock if the adults were generous with their shadows." He handed me a laminated sheet. Jefferson's Hour. Someone had drawn a little sun with a smug smile. Me and a teacher made this for the kids 2 blocks over. Says, at 4, stand apart. Give the light a path to take that isn't a child. "You kept that habit this whole time?" "Habits keep me," he said. "And they keep other people alive when I forget." We walked to the playground. He stood where he remembered the woman, the car, the confectionery ruse. I stood where the corridor had tried to form itself into manners yesterday. We waited for the hour that likes flattery. Parents made their living room posture. The day did its trick. Mr. Delgado did his. He stepped into the brightness like a bouncer with good theology. The flare lost its edge. The hum thinned. A boy chasing a ball veered, not because he'd seen a ghost, but because his instinct for not dash wanting dash to dash bumped dash into dash, a dash, Grandpa overruled whatever the light had proposed. Mr. Delgado tipped an imaginary hat to the impolite. After, we sat on the bench with the Dulce's scar, and he told me the part of the story that doesn't make it to press conferences. "The woman who took him," he said, voice small as a ticket stub. "She was offered grace by the merchants because she spent money. She was offered grace by the mothers because she spoke like a neighbor. She was offered grace by the day. Grace without discretion is a ladder thieves learn to climb. You think she had help? I think help had her," he said. "Some places recruit the wrong parts of us." I called Ale that evening and asked if Luis liked radios. "He likes repairs," she said. "He likes fixing things with screws that pretend to be lost." I told her about the corridor, the mirror, the hour. She went quiet in a way people go quiet when a sentence plugs a leak they've lived with too long. "You're telling me there was a howl," she said. "Not a magic one. A human one that used the weather." "A manners one," I said. "A street that got too helpful." "I can take that to church," she said. We met the next day at her aunt's house, where grief had been invited to leave its shoes by the door. She had printed out a flyer in English and Spanish with a headline that didn't apologize. "Be less helpful at 4. The subhead, "Save your kindness for later." We took it to the park and behaved like salespeople for a religion neither of us could afford to believe in without data. Parents nodded. A few bristled. One woman rolled her stroller into the corridor while we watched and said, "I'm not scared of light." Ale said, "Me neither." "I'm scared of schedules." 2 teens in matching shirts, summer program volunteers, agreed to be bored for a demonstration. We put a cheap foam board where the corridor wanted to dress and wrote "Not this way" on it in marker that refused to be tasteful. The hour arrived, saw the board, and behaved like weather, being told the party is private. A breeze went somewhere else to be beautiful. The teens clapped ironically, which is still clapping. I stayed a week. I watched the park learn a new trick that wasn't a trick at all. Adults stopped forming well-meaning walls their bodies couldn't afford to be. Children learned to say nope to brightness. Mr. Delgado taught a class on radios and distance, where he said the kind of sentences you put on the back of your hand. Near is not always neighborly. Loud is not always close. Help is not always helpful. On Thursday, a ranger from across town came to watch. She'd heard rumors that Jefferson Playground had become difficult for polite illusions. Could be useful at Lakeside, she said. Geese and men don't need the same courtesies. On Friday, we stood in the old corridor and watched a summer camp group pass through like an army that had signed a better treaty. A child at the end of the line touched the bench and said, "Gracias." I don't know if he was thanking wood, or a name, or an idea. It didn't matter. It worked. I tried calling the agent, whose knock had introduced Luis to his name. He returned the call with the voice of a man who keeps his work where it belongs. "Appreciate the focus on place," he said. "We've got the person part." The machine that helped him, if there was one, was the day. Hard to indict the sun? You indict the schedule, I said. And the habit? Habit's our jurisdiction, he said. Sometimes. He asked me not to write about small investigatory things that belong to rooms with blinds, and I said I was writing about rooms with windows. He laughed and told me a story about recovering a child's name a continent away because the grown-ups in one town learned a new rule. Count kids by names, not shirts. Makes abductions slightly more expensive, he said. I like expensive crimes. The last evening, Ale introduced me to her uncle. Not Luis, that meeting's private for the family and the Lord, but a different uncle who makes furniture as a way of arguing with time. He shook my hand like men did before hands learned complicated politics. You came for the case, he said. You stayed for the park. I'm late to most lessons worth learning, I said. He ran his thumb along the photo's edge with a flare still wanted to finish its decade. This is a witness, he said. Not proof. Witnesses tell the truth they have. You gathered the rest where the truth lives now. At the motel, the bedspread forgave me for promising I'd be gone in the morning. The reel-to-reel clicked warm. I spoke into the tape like I was leaving a message for the part of America that still picks up. We solved the case, I said. We didn't outsource the lesson. At 4 o'clock, be impolite. Put your shoulder where the corridor wants to form. Save some kindness for later. I paused. And if the air cools the way a lie cools when it's about to be caught, clap for nothing in particular. You just made weather behave. Tomorrow, I will drive east toward a door where a man who used to be a boy will open it, let a reporter sit in his kitchen, and let me listen to a name in 2 tenses at once. I won't ask him for the sensational parts. He's paid that tax. I'll ask him for the quiet physics of living with both birthdays. And if he lets me, I'll ask what his afternoons sound like now. Luce's door opened like a man easing a memory into daylight. He was compact the way former firefighters are, shoulders still filing paperwork with gravity. The living room had the ecosystems you expect at his age. A neat chair for reading, a Messier one for thinking, a table with coasters that had actually been used. There was a soft clatter in the kitchen, then a voice. We have company? A woman appeared with the smile of someone who has been guarding peace and intends to keep it. Coffee? She asked, and solved the problem while I said yes. Luis sat, palms on his knees, and watched me watch the room. You're the reporter, he said, tone offering a handshake to the fact. I am, I said, but today I'm your audience. He nodded, approving of the demotion. Good, he said. I don't want to be a headline. I want to be explained to myself. He glanced toward a framed photo on the shelf. A Marine in a dress uniform, a young firefighter in a helmet, a man at a picnic table with strangers who had become siblings in the way work does. "They've been trying to tell me I'm a miracle," he said, a little tired of the word. "I'm not. I'm a citizen with 2 birthdays in my mouth." We talked about the parts of his life the public already knows. The discipline that builds a body like a tool. The relief of being useful. The way a siren can shepherd your attention into a good lane. Then we talked about the part you can't put in a press release. How in September, a niece and an agent, and a swab, and a printer made a bridge into a name he had been living next to without crossing. What changed? I asked. The direction the room faced, he said. I've lived most of my life with the furniture arranged for someone else's weather. Now the light in the afternoon comes through the right window. He smiled. That sounds dramatic. It's just a chair turned 3 inches. I asked what he remembered of 1951, and he answered carefully, like a craftsman tapping a nail. Spanish, he said first. The good kind, the ant kind. A woman with a bandana who knew how to make a boy feel like a volunteer. A car that smelled like someone else's laundry. The rest is. A hallway. He made a small gesture in the air, as if drawing a rectangle. Quiet on one side, voices on the other. My brother's voice from too far away to be how far away he was. Do you want to know the names? I asked. He looked at his hands and decided they were enough to keep busy. Names matter to rooms with locks, he said. I want to know how. I want the place to confess the physics to me. So I told him what the air had shown us. The thinning, the corridor of courtesy, a sunny day can build between a shadow and a shine if adults tidy their edges in unison. I told him about mirrors, about bodies building shade, about an hour that liked flattery 4 o'clock then, in Oakland, when shadows grow useful and start telling lies if you let them. He listened like a Marine receiving orders he already decided to follow. He didn't argue, didn't reach for the cinematic. I like it, he said finally. It makes the thing I lived through small enough to fix for the next child. We walked his block at the hour his porch light likes best. East Coast afternoon is softer than Oakland's, but it can flatter itself on demand. We stood where the sidewalk kinks and let the sun try its manners. When the thin began, he stepped into it with that firefighter's economy. No flourish, no sermon, just shoulder and presence. The effect fizzled. A kid on a scooter steered wide. A dog decided to respect a leash. The day got over itself. After, back at the table, he told me something he hadn't told his niece. I remember a song, he said, embarrassed like a man confessing to liking the wrong kind of radio. Not a melody, a standing wave. Like when 2 stations argue and a third thing happens. Sometimes, right before I fall asleep, I hear it again. What does it want? Nothing, he said, and the relief in his voice was a different kind of miracle. It's just 2 truths overlaid, asking permission not to pretend they're one. He pulled a shoebox from the hall closet and set it down like a pet who needs reassuring. Inside, newspaper clippings about other fires he'd put out, letters from people who owed him their continued Christmases, a ribbon from a foundation that thanks you by making you wear your goodness. At the bottom, wrapped in old tissue, a small handheld mirror with a cracked edge. Where'd you get that? I asked. A nurse gave it to me when I was 6, he said. Not for vanity, for homework. She said, sometimes what you need is behind you and wants help arriving in front of you. I learned to bounce light, to find things that got lost under beds. Sometimes I think she was teaching the opposite of whatever someone else taught that woman in Oakland. We sat with the idea that a nurse had been undoing gently what a stranger had done with an ugly grace. You ever wish the world would hand you one clean villain? I asked. No, he said. Clean villains make lazy citizens. Give me a messy system, a rude rule, and a checklist. I can live in that. When I left, he walked me to the door and did a thing I will keep like a coin in a pocket. He turned, faced the afternoon, and said to the air, softly but with command, not this way. He didn't tell the day to stop shining. He told it to mind its business. I called Ale on the drive back to my motel, told her about the walk, the mirror, the hallway memory that wasn't a ghost, but a contour the afternoon drew for a few seconds in 1951 and kept trying to draw when it felt invited. She told me the neighborhood had adopted the rule, flyers in English and Spanish, a practice line made from cheap cloth between two tomato steaks. An older couple who used to sit shoulder to shoulder at 4 now sit with a respectful gap. He says he can hear his brother better when they do that, she said. The next morning, I stood again at Jefferson Playground with Mr. Delgado and a teacher who had brought a class of small skeptics. Armed with juice boxes, we demonstrated with a mirror and a foam board. The hour came. The board said no. The light decided it would rather light up bark and basketballs than the stakes. The children approved, which is to say they stopped noticing and started playing. The teacher took a picture and said, "I'd like to teach more lessons like this, where the test is, did you keep having a normal day?" On the last afternoon, I walked the fence line alone, a reporter with his sentences packed and only the small ones left loose. I touched the post with the carved word Dulcies and thought about the ways gifts become traps if they arrive with schedules attached. Then the air cooled not a chill, for once, but the subtraction of fuss and the park gave me a quiet, I won't dramatize, the feeling of two truths that used to overlap deciding they could stand next to each other without borrowing each other's shine. Back at the motel, I recorded the day as if it were a deposition. "Luis is alive," I said. "He learned his name again. The who will keep grinding in rooms with blinds. The how is ours. At 4, stop hiding with your body. If the light tries to be a host, thank it and close the door. Teach your street to be a little rude where kindness gets recruited for harm. Give the next child the ordinary afternoon I just watched a town earn." You can tell a city has learned something when the smallest jobs start showing off. The parks crew at Jefferson began arriving with a roll of match shade cloth they called the impoliteness. They'd string it knee-high across the old corridor from 350 to 430 and coil it back up like good gossip. The kids stepped over it like a rule they were proud to know. Parents stopped forming human awnings. The air, deprived of choreography, behaved like air. I kept writing, and the story kept refusing to be tragic in the way advertisers prefer. My editor called and said, "Can we get haunting in the first paragraph?" I said, "We can get hum," which is what haunting sounds like when it stops needing attention. She said, "Send it," and then, because she knows me, added, "Include a box called How to Be Rude at 4. Ale and I visited Luis one more time, a courtesy call dressed as an excuse to bring Pandulce. He sat us at the table and showed me the map his niece had taped to the fridge, a calendar of small towns and parks and churchyards between Oakland and the place he'd made a life, each with a date and a person's name next to it. "That's who's getting a kit," she said. "Priya's mailing them in batches. We're calling it the Afternoon Project. Not a foundation, a habit." Lise tapped the map with a knuckle that had been invited to too many doors. "Every dot is a chair turned 3 inches, he said. We asked if the reunion had given him anything he didn't know to want. He looked toward the hallway and held the answer there, as if the walls had earned it. "I like my name in my own mouth," he said finally. "I like saying it with the voice of a man who made it this far without it, and has decided to forgive the letters for taking their time." He smiled, a muscle he had reintroduced to work gently. "I like that my brother's laugh fits in the house. On the way out, he handed me the cracked mirror. 'For your bag,' he said, 'not because you'll need it, because you'll want to remember you could.'" The week tried to end twice and failed. The park gave us weather that wanted to apologize for August. A cooler whispered a prayer for ice. Mr. Delgado lectured 2 teenagers about AM interference in civics and got the sort of eye roll that says a lesson landed but refused to sign for it. Then the thing happened that closes one door and opens another. A mother I didn't know walked up with a little girl I didn't deserve and said, "Tell him." The girl, maybe 7, toes pale from sandals, said, "We don't help the sun when it's already good at its job." Then she added, conspiratorial, "And we count by names." The mother nodded, tearless, the way relief sometimes insists. "I wanted you to know," she said, "that the rule has a home." That night, I sat with the tape machine and tried to record the sound of a solved place. It doesn't make good radio. It's children being ordinary and adults being disciplined about not being heroic. The hum still visits the day is generous, even after you teach it not to audition. But it visits with its hat in its hand now, and we say thank you. Come back at 5. You want the unexplainable? Fine. Here's the part I don't pretend to understand. Once a street learns a new courtesy, it travels. A man sent me a video from a cul-de-sac in Albuquerque, cloth between 2 mailboxes, a timer on a phone, a child declaring nope at 3:58. A woman wrote from Miami, "We use palm shadows and say permiso to the air." A pastor from Oklahoma printed my "How to be rude at 4 box in a bulletin" and added "Amen" at the end as if punctuation scares devils. The weather everywhere tested the new policy and found it boring, which is the compliment it deserves. Back in Oakland, Ale organized a small gathering that wasn't a vigil or a parade. A bench got placed on purpose. The Dulce's scratch got a clear coat so it could retire without disappearing. Mr. Delgado tuned every radio in his apartment to the same station and then turned the volume down so low you could only hear the agreement. Priya, by video, told the teenagers, "You just did something engineers love. You changed the initial conditions. You didn't fight the effect. You changed the cause." I took the cracked mirror out of my bag and faced it toward the old corridor. The glass, argumentative as always, caught a flash and then gave it back like a waiter with boundaries. The hour passed. The park, having learned not to audition for anything, kept being a park. My last interview was with Roger's daughter Luce's niece's cousin, who had inherited her father's laugh and the family's stubbornness. We sat on a stoop and let the breeze pay for our silence. "People are going to ask you for tragedy," she said. "They're going to want you to sell the hurt like a souvenir. Don't. Tell them about radios and shade cloth and how to arrange your body so the light minds its business." "That's been my whole midlife," I said. "Arranging my body so the world minds its business." "Write that?" she said. But less poetic, I tried. The piece went out under a title I could live with, The Weather's Apology. The first paragraph didn't promise horror. It promised a rule. The second paragraph told a truth I wanted my name on. Solved cases are not the end of the work. They're the beginning of the maintenance. The sidebar had a diagram that a 7th grader could hand to a grandparent. The comments, bless them, were mostly people saying they'd tried it and nothing happened. At 4, and they'd never been so happy to be bored. On my way out of town, I stopped at the fence to say a thing out loud that I had been saving for when I wasn't performing for my tape machine. "Thank you for learning," I said to wood and air and the marks of a mother's purse. "Keep the grace. Mind the scheduling." A crow answered with bureaucracy. I took that as assent. Halfway to the airport, Ale texted me a picture of 2 kids playing on the new bench. One had a sticker on her shirt that said helper. The other had one that said later. I laughed alone in a rented car and felt like a man who'd witnessed a policy and a punchline in the same week. The case file is closed in the way cabinets close, quiet, imperfect, not locked against the future. The man who once was a boy is alive in the way Americans mean it, busy, stubborn, privately kind. The park has a new hour, a rude one, and a habit that keeps counting children by names. And if the hum ever gets ideas again, it knows the answer it'll get from a city that finally moved its chair 3 inches. Not this way. The first town to write back with a photograph wasn't on anyone's list of troubled places. Pleasant River, population 5,000 and change, sent a picture of 2 tomato steaks, a thrift store bedsheet, and a grandmother with forearms that could pass new legislation. The caption read, "We tried being rude at 4. It stuck. Thank you for the words we didn't know we needed." Words are bridges, but they're also screws. You can use them to hold weight. I drove to Pleasant River because middle age has taught me not to ignore invitations with good punctuation. The park there reminded me of every 4th of July I've ever forgiven. A sheriff's deputy in a hat that knew how to tip walked me to a patch of lawn and said, "We saw your story. We thought, why wait for tragedy to enroll us?" The deputy Curtis, who could have been 20 or 60, and was probably both on different days, told me they'd mixed the rule with an old one. Count by names, not colors. "We stole it from a teacher," he said. "She says names give you more consonants to hold on to when the wind picks up." They had trained soccer coaches to pause afternoon drills at 4 and stand apart. They had trained kids to shout, "Nope," if the sun tried to get handsy. The town had become an orchestra that tuned politely and then played ordinary without a conductor. I found the teacher, Ms. Grant, handing out orange slices like currency. She'd taped a half sheet to the bench. At 3:55, say names out loud. At 4 o'clock, step out of people's shade. If it feels silly, you're doing it right. I told her about Oakland. She told me about a bus stop where the light used to make a shortcut and how a senior citizen group learned to block it with a folding chair and a newsletter. They bring crossword puzzles, can dare the sun to argue, she said. It loses. A father standing nearby asked the question people ask when they're ready to be better, but afraid of becoming ridiculous. What if my neighbors think I'm overreacting? Tell them you're rehearsing, I said. Rehearsal is what adults call practice when they want to sound artistic. He nodded, relieved. I can rehearse, he said. I left Pleasant River with a paper plate of lemon bars and the unearned sense that civilization is a set of small tools we forgot we owned. On the way out of town, a billboard tried to sell me a truck big enough to pull a county. I smiled at it and said, "We already learned how to move something heavier." At night, in the motel where the carpet graduated the same year I did, I rolled tape and spoke to a future listener who might be suspicious of hope. We didn't summon angels, I said. We put people a step apart at 4 o'clock. We changed one sentence in a town's grammar, and the paragraph made more sense. Morning had me back in Oakland, because some goodbyes need to be done twice. Elle met me at the park with a bag that said Panaderia in a font that trusted you. Mr. Delgado had a flyer for his radio class with a new line. M530 weather behaving, citizens impolite. A woman I'd seen a week earlier stopped me at the gate. I was the stroller, she said, embarrassed and defiant. I rolled right into the corridor to prove I wasn't scared. That was pride pretending to be courage. I'm better now. We sat on the bench and shared a concha the size of a tree. Ale told me Luis had started using his mirror again, at the sink, of all places, bouncing light into the cabinet under the bathroom, where the lost lives of households go to become future archaeology. He laughs when he finds batteries, she said. He says it feels like an apology accepted. I asked about Roger the brother, who'd gotten his embrace, late and right on time. He's tired, she said. He paid the interest on hope for 7 decades and then got his principal back in a single hug. There's math grief understands better than me. She paused. He said something, though, the day after. I can sit on my porch now without supervising the sun. We took the kit to a churchyard that had been pretending not to need us. The pastor, who told me to call him Jim because titles make him itchy, announced from the steps, "We are not here to be dramatic. We are here to rehearse rudeness at 4. His congregation nodded like they had agreed on breakfast. We strung the cloth, positioned the mirrors not to flash drivers, placed the foam board. When the hour came, The light did what light does, and the church answered the way churches should, with a policy. That afternoon, I called my editor from a payphone because nostalgia sometimes insists on being inconvenient. "We've got towns," I said. "Not just a case. Send me 3, she said. "We'll make it a series, The Afternoon Project." "And the headline today?" She sighed in the way that means she's sharpening her best pencil. "Counting by names," she said. "Or How to Be Rude at 4. Both," I said. Make the homepage argue with itself. Before I left again, for real this time, Ale pressed something into my hand. A photo of the Dulcie's bench, lacquer now dry, with 2 stickers stuck to the rail. Helper and later. "We're teaching it in kindergarten," she said. Helper and later are not enemies. They're neighbors who take turns. On the plane, a seatmate asked what I do, the way planes invite biography. "I write about afternoons," I said, which is either the worst flex or my business card from now on. He laughed and told me about a cul-de-sac where the dads stand at the curb at pickup time and make jokes about being cones. "We yell, 'Not this way,' at the wind," he said. It's dumb, and it works. Home again. My apartment did its humble magic. The AC hummed. The sign leaned where it could supervise my bad habits. The tape deck waited like a priest who doesn't mind if you swear. I stood in the kitchen at 4 o'clock and moved my shoulder out of a beam that had gotten used to using me as architecture. It felt like a vacation policy I should have adopted years ago. A week later, a letter arrived in an envelope with handwriting that made me sit up like a dog hearing its name. The return address was the East Coast. Inside, a single line on thick paper. 2 birthdays, it said, one afternoon. Underneath, a careful signature. Lee's eye. I put it in the frame where his photograph used to sit. The photo I carry now is of boards and cloth and a child, pointing at a rectangle and saying, "Nope," like an anthem you whisper, so as not to scare it away. There are 3 parts left to tell, if you'll have them. How a city makes a rule last longer than sentiment. How a man returns home to a porch that stopped requiring him to supervise the weather. And one small unexplainable that refused to be showy and became, instead, a kindness. Back home, my apartment practiced the new rule without being asked. At 4 p.m., the western light pawed at the rug, remembered itself, and flattened like a dog told place. I'd moved one armchair 3 inches off the beam, and now, somehow, the day minded its business. A neighbor across the hall, Mr. Patel, stuck his head out as if our building had a town square. "You're the count-by-names guy," he said. I admitted the rumor. "We're trying your thing for after-school pickups," he added. I stand where the glare used to show a shortcut and pretend I'm a tree with opinions. "Trees with opinions save the summer," I said. I was almost done writing. The skeleton of the series stood. Oakland's solved case, the corridor that flattered the wrong hour, the kit, the towns, the rude, polite rule. What remained was the unglamorous thing stories often skip. How to make a rule last longer than the people who invented it. The answer came from a place that understands repetition, Little League. Coach Renee, who runs 2 practices and a community garden with the same voice, invited me to the field. "We've been calling it the 3-inch rule," she said, pushing her cap back. "At 4, move something 3 inches the chair, your stance, your assumptions. The change cues the body without turning safety into a sermon." She made her players try it. At 3:58, the infielders shuffled out of knee-to-knee clumps. The outfielders stopped doing human shade. Parents spread along the fence, not stacked. 2 volunteers took cone duty at the bright patch by the bleachers. When the light tried to be host rather than instrument, the field shrugged like an old pro. Practice kept its rhythm. Nobody clapped. Renee nodded once. Score kept in a ledger only the hour reads. After she said the thing that should be printed on every flyer, make safety default, not performance. I stole it for my peace. That weekend, I drove back to the coast to see Lees one more time before turning him back into a private citizen. He met me with coffee and a mechanic's grin. "You ready for ridiculous?" he asked, and led me to the bathroom. He'd mounted a tiny LED inside the cabinet and put the cracked mirror on the opposite wall. "At night," he said, "the light bounces without blinding. I can see what's lost without the glare, turning the room into a stage. Every man wants a bathroom that doesn't audition," I said. He laughed, then turned serious the way people do when a habit shows its lineage. "I didn't know how much of my life was designed by other people's light," he said. "It's like I've been working in borrowed weather. Turning a chair 3 inches is the least dramatic thing I've ever done, and somehow it feels like an apology accepted." We walked to his porch. Across the street, a group of kids were inventing a game with rules they explained as they broke them. The afternoon began its costume change. Shadows stretched like men who'd been sitting too long. Luis watched, then stood, then took 2 precise steps and parked himself in the old corridor that wanted to form between the maple and the curb. The light corrected its manners. A boy on a scooter adjusted course without noticing why. "I don't need to supervise the sun," he said, echoing Roger's line, then added, "but I like reminding it we've met." We sat there with the familiarity of men who've learned that silence is the better half of most conversations. Finally, he said, "You ever think about how the solved part of a case is just a receipt, and the living part is the budget?" "I think about budgets constantly," I said. "Emotionally, financially, attention, ally." "Attentionally," he repeated, savoring the coinage. "That's the currency." The woman in the bandana borrowed a whole neighborhood's attention for 10 seconds. We pay that back with interest now by giving our attention better edges. On the drive back, I stopped in a town whose name my phone refused to learn. I like those places. They stay unrated. Kids there had drawn chalk arrows toward the library and away from the bright gap between 2 storefronts. The arrows were wrong by any traffic engineer's standard, and perfect by the gospel of ordinary. A grandmother sat on a folding chair in the gap, reading a paperback court drama with the concentration of an appeals judge. "The light's pushy in September," she said without looking up. "Somebody's got to teach it manners." I sent a photo of her to Ale. She replied with one of Roger on his porch. Head back, eyes closed, a man letting the afternoon pass unsupervised for perhaps the first time in 7 decades. She wrote, "He naps at 4. This is justice." At home, I laid pages of my draft on the floor like tiles and made a path through them that my feet could understand. The first section took your hand, the second taught your eyes, the third gave you a kit, the fourth put you in a town, the fifth gave you names to count. The sixth needed to plant the rules so deep in habit you'd forget where you learned it. So I wrote the part invisible in most programs: maintenance. How to sustain a small civic magic when novelty dries up. Assign the hour to someone boring. Boring is a superpower. If the safety rule is owned by the dramatic, it will rely on drama to survive. Pair the rule with food. Lemon bars have accomplished more safety reforms than ordinances ever will. Make a child the auditor. Kids spot cheating faster than committees. Tie it to weather, not mood. At 4 beats when we remember. Let it spread sideways. Don't franchise. Allow translation. 3-inch rule here. Helper and later there. Not this way, everywhere. I ended the section with the thing Mr. Delgado said after his radio class. Teach the hour to forgive us when we forget, and teach us to forgive the hour when it tries to be pretty. That line fits in an old man's mouth and on a magnet, which is as good a peer review as any. 2 days later, a box arrived on my stoop. Inside, matte cloth, 2 clamps, a folded foam board printed with "Not This Way" on one side and "Count by Names" on the other, a sheet of instructions written in the calm tone of a nurse, and a sticker. The Afternoon Project. No logo. No donate link. Just a sentence. Save some kindness for later. I took the kit to my own block. At 3:58, I strung the cloth between our mailbox and a lamppost that thinks it's a poem. Mr. Patel came out with a comb he'd stolen from his commute. The teens from 2B brought chalk and made arrows toward the stoop where Mrs. Hardy watches everything with the benevolence of a grandmother judge. At 4, the day put on its manners. We put on ours. Nothing happened. It was the loudest nothing I've ever heard. As I write this, the evening makes its argument outside my window. Somewhere a siren is convincing everyone to cooperate. Somewhere a mother is counting by names. Somewhere an old case rests in a drawer beside a new habit, and both are, for once, filed under done enough for today. 2 parts remain. One is a homecoming for all of us to a version of afternoon that doesn't need supervision. The other is a whisper from the unexplainable, not to show off, but to nod at us like the weather finally recognizing our face. There's a sound afternoons make in old neighborhoods once the rule takes root. Not silence, never silence. It's the soft choreography of normal. Screen doors negotiating with hinges, a coach's whistle used as punctuation, not alarm, a kid yelling, "Mine," at a ball and meaning only the ball. I started walking at 3:45 just to catch the overture. Mr. Patel became the patron saint of my blocks, 4 o'clock. He'd step into the corridor by the mailbox like he was clocking in for a 6-minute shift. The teens from 2B painted a tiny line on the sidewalk, 3 inches from the curb, then laughed, themselves silly at how official a paint chip can make you feel. Mrs. Hardy waved from the stoop, the kind of wave that says if God needs an usher, he knows where to find me. At 4 o'clock, nothing dramatic happened, and we felt brave. The story should end there, right? A solved case, a family intact around a new table, a town with a habit. But endings that behave are suspicious, so the day did me one better. It offered a small, unshowy permission. It began as a letter from Roger, written in the hand you learn from decades of writing useful notes to yourself. "I nap at 4 now," it said, "and when I wake, I don't have to check the sun." He'd enclosed a photograph of his porch, just wood and light, and a newspaper folded with the sports on top, because men make their peace where they can. On the back he wrote, "The sound in the afternoon is different, not quieter, less. Expectant." Expectant is exactly right. Before the rule, the hour held its breath like a stagehand waiting for a cue. After, it exhaled. I started noticing it across cities as the kit spread, in Pleasant River, in Willow Bend, in a cul-de-sac whose HOA had adopted helper and later into their bylaws with the kind of joy committees rarely show in public. Streets were letting go of the idea that they owed drama attendance. Ale called to say Lise had bought a cheap camera. "Point and shoot," she said, amused. He takes 1 photo a day at 4. Birds, shadows, his own hands. He says it helps him own the light. She sent me one. The bathroom cabinet open, the tiny LED glowing, the cracked mirror reflecting a man's hand, holding a screwdriver like a proof of life. The caption, "I found the batteries." I went back to Oakland to watch the park for what I hoped would be the last time I had to. Not because the place needed supervision, because I did. Mr. Delgado met me with a radio set to a station that played 3 chords and a promise. He'd added a line to his class, "If you can't help, don't tidy." He turned the volume down until the song became structure, then let it keep time with our walking sticks. At 3:57, a breeze tried on its old trick. The benches didn't bite. At 3:59, a father did that little posture men do when they want to be shade. The mother at his side touched his elbow. "Tree's got it," she said. He smiled at the relief of not having to be a canopy. At 4:01, the corridor recruited nobody. It went job hunting elsewhere and found a better gig on a brick facade that actually needed brightening. Even the weather can learn. We sat with Mary Ellen, who had learned to enjoy lemon bars publicly, and watched a group of kids move through space, like they'd been taught gravity in a language that cared about them. "I thought I'd want a plaque," she said. "Turns out I wanted recipes." "What kind?" "The kind that turn hope into a casserole you can take to your neighbor without embarrassing anyone," she said. 4 o'clock casseroles. That's what this is. We laughed, and then because laughter pays for a certain kind of honesty, she said, "I wanted you to see something before you write the last page." She pointed at the Dulcie's bench. Someone had left a small paper bag on the seat, folded twice with the discipline of a lunch from a careful home. Inside, 2 pieces of hard candy wrapped in cellophane. A note in block letters. For later. No signature. No sermon. Just a kindness that had learned the schedule. I won't pretend I didn't cry. I'm a sap built to code. But it wasn't a grief cry. It was the version you save for weddings and small victories. Later is the hardest muscle to build in a culture that worships now. Some child, or some parent, or some neighbor had offered sweetness to time itself and asked for patience in return. On my last evening in town, Roger invited me to sit on his porch. He didn't tell stories. He let the evening do it. That's the difference between survivors and performers. Survivors know the world can carry its half of the conversation. He dozed for a minute, woke, and said, "The sun and I are on speaking terms." Then he added, "When I hear kids at 4 now, they sound like kids. Not like witnesses. If you've ever needed a benediction, that's the one." I drove home in the kind of dusk that makes radio DJs quote poetry. I didn't turn the dial. I said the words that have become my liturgy at the county line pull-off. "We're good. Thank you." The hum, faithful, curious, incurable, came to the window and asked if we were doing a show. "Not this one," I told it. "This one's for neighbors." Back in my apartment, I wrote the second to last page. It wasn't a climax. It was a checklist's greatest hits. Count by names. Be rude at 4. Move the chair 3 inches. Let helper and later sit next to each other without fighting. Use lemon bars. Appoint a boring person. Give a child the whistle. Forgive the hour when it gets fancy. Forgive yourself when you forget. Try again tomorrow. The unexplainable got exactly 1 paragraph. Sometimes, when a street keeps a good promise long enough, the light thanks you. You'll be washing a cup at 4:07, or tying a shoe, or deciding against an errand, and the room will cool the way a friend's hand cools when it finds yours. Not spooky. Not a sign. Just the afternoon remembering what you taught it and sending back a quiet confirmation. If you hear a hum, it won't be a corridor asking for permission. It'll be the day clearing its throat to say, later, then. That paragraph is for people who've carried too much proof and not enough witness. We have 1 part left. It belongs to the bench, to the kit that doesn't ask for a logo, to the old tape machine that kept receipts, and to the man who found batteries in a cabinet that finally showed him what was waiting there all along. It's a landing, not an ending. It's a place to put your shoulder when the hour arrives. The landing place for a story like this is not a courtroom or a front page. It's a bench and a kitchen timer. The bench holds knees that have learned how to rest without feeling derelict. The timer says 4 and then stops sounding important, which is what you want from a rule after it's been learned. I went back one last time because goodbyes are a courtesy we owe to places that hosted our sentences. Oakland answered the way a city does when it has nothing to prove. It went on. The park practiced boredom with the confidence of a veteran. The impoliteness cloth stayed folded. People used their bodies like punctuation space where a comma belonged. A period with a corner once tried to extend a thought that didn't deserve it. Ale met me with coffee, and a grin that had become local weather. "He takes fewer pictures at 4 now," she said. "He doesn't need proof as often." We walked past the Dulce's bench. The clear coat made the scratch look like a signature the day had countersigned. Someone had stuck 2 fresh stickers on the back rail, "Helper" and "Later," separated by a small, respectful gap. It felt like the town's handwriting. Mr. Delgado, faithful as radio, caught up with us, his dial set to ordinary. "We've got a subcommittee," he announced, deadpan. 2 teenagers and a bored accountant. Their job is to panic if the rule gets turned into merch. Bored accountants are how civilizations avoid collectible pins. I said. He nodded. "We're getting good at the unglamorous parts," he said. "That's the test." The churchyard had turned its practice line into a strip of lavender planted low, bees auditioning for summer. The soccer field's 3-inch reminders had weathered into the dirt, but the bodies remembered. A bus stop wore a little plaque the size of a confession. At 4, stand apart. Give the light a path that isn't a person. Before I left the city for good, I asked to sit with Roger again. He obliged. Porch as courtroom, breeze as stenographer. "I used to supervise afternoons," he said, eyes half closed. "Now I let them talk among themselves." He smiled. "You ever notice how, when you stop watching the sun for trouble, it goes back to looking like a clock?" We were quiet long enough for wisdom to knock and not feel rushed. Then he added, "The thing I wish for other families is not a miracle. It's a calendar that doesn't circle 1 hour in red." That line followed me home like a well-behaved dog. I wrote it in the margin of my notebook where titles try out their voices. A calendar without red. My editor chose a better one, but that's the name I keep. Back on my block, I became what I had been chronicling, a neighbor with a habit. At 3:58, Mr. Patel and I put a cone and a joke in the bright patch. The teens from 2B taught a new kid helper and later with the severity of diplomats. Mrs. Hardy appointed herself auditor and dinged us whenever we used heroics where spacing would do. At 4:06, a delivery driver said, "You people are so weird," which is high praise in logistics. And then the thing I promised, a small unexplainable that refused to audition, arrived on a Tuesday with the mail. The room cooled, not the AC kind, the friend finding your hand kind. The hum lifted like a question and set itself down like an answer. It was the shape of weather, remembering it had been taught a courtesy and enjoying keeping it. If you need the word, call it grace. If you don't, call it a good habit finally feeling like instinct. I took the sign, the one that had ridden shotgun and supervised my dishes, and walked it to our little branch library. The librarian has a way of treating objects like they just confessed something generous. "Back corner?" she asked. "Near local maps." We leaned it there, face inward, as if asking it to rest from its work until needed. A kid noticed and read it out loud, "Not this way," and then, satisfied, went to find a book about frogs. A week later, the afternoon project stopped needing my sentences. Kits moved through the mail like modest instruments. Lemon bars moved through bake sales like policy. A video arrived from an elementary school in Vermont, a line of first graders walking past a bright rectangle, each saying "later" to it like a friend they were fond of but busy. A parish in Louisiana sent a photo of a hand-painted sign, "Save some kindness for later with gumbo." I printed that and taped it inside the notebook where I keep proof against despair. People ask what to do if they don't have a kit, a bench, a committee, a Mr. Delgado. Here is the short list that fits in a pocket. At 4, step out of people's shade. Count by names. Move one thing 3 inches. Give a child the job of auditor. If the light tries to be too helpful, thank it and say, "Later then." If you forget one afternoon, the hour will forgive you. If the hour forgets, you forgive it. That reciprocity is what makes neighborhoods different from policies. I called Luis to read him the last paragraphs because some endings deserve witnesses. He listened the way men who have been professionally alert learn to listen when the alertness is finally optional. "Good," he said. "Tell them I found batteries in the cabinet again. I'm getting good at finding small power." He paused, then added, "Tell them I don't hear the hallway anymore. I hear my brother laugh, and then I hear a sink." "You want the last sentence?" I asked. "Give it to the bench," he said. "It's doing more work than both of us. So here it is, the last sentence I'll make you hold in your mouth before you try it with your feet. We don't have to help the sun do its job. We have to help each other do ours. So at 4 in the afternoon, save some kindness for later, stand where a corridor once wanted to form, and let the ordinary finish the day. If you're reading this near a window, look up. If the light is behaving too nicely, smile at it the way you do at a neighbor who's already done you a favor. Tell it, gently and with practice in your voice. Not this way. Then go on with your ordinary. It's the bravest thing we get,